Sentinel and MySouthShoreNow.com. Roll call, Alderperson Levy.
Here.
Alderperson Haynes.
Here.
Alderperson Leversky.
Here.
Alderperson St. Marie Belko.
Here.
Citizen Member Campbell.
Here.
Citizen Member Opala. Also present City Attorney, DPW Director, both Fire Chief and Police Chief, Communications Director, and Health and Assistant Clerk, City Administrator, and City Clerk, as well as the Mayor and the Chair. We'll start it with public comment, agenda items only.
Can you show the agenda items so we can see what's on it?
Each speaker will be limited to one 3-minute presentation for each public comment or hearing from the Cudahy residents placed on the agenda. Any discourse between the speaker and committee, if absolutely necessary, will be minimal as to avoid potential open meetings law violations. All meeting attendees should honor the need for a respectful and safe environment, mainly avoiding sidebar conversations as well as cheering, booing, clapping, etc.
All right, so open public comment. Anyone have comment? Otherwise, we will move on.
I don't know what's on.
All right, seeing no one has any public comment, we'll move on. Old business, we have none.
I'm sorry, one moment.
Yep, go ahead. Sorry.
I was trying to figure out the agenda items there. I couldn't read it, but. So that's what we're allowed to discuss, is that correct? Robert Cost, 3745 Henry Avenue. That's correct?
Yep. The presentation of the capital improvement plan or the approval of the minutes from October 21st, 2025.
Okay. So, presentation of the capital improvement plan. According to that plan, it looked like there was $125 million worth of, on the wish list, if you would, for a new borrow, as well as borrowing for the 22 or so million dollars that we currently have in the borrow. Am I correct along those points? Pretty close. Okay, so with that, it never said what we're currently, our interest rate for the old borrow is, okay? There was a flat 5% borrow if we moved everything into this new borrow. Now, according to the state of Wisconsin, the DOR, the equalized value is, for this city, is $1.2 billion. And I believe that we're able to go up to 5% of that for a borrow, or to leverage, if you will, which would be somewhere around $60 million or so, something like that. How are we able to borrow twice that amount? I'm kind of curious how that's gonna work. And for the roads, it looks like we were gonna borrow somewhere around $60 million for this plan. Is it possible not to borrow and to do the, like St. Francis Town Hall had something to say about that, where it was like pay as you go. The citizen is taxed for the reconstruction of the road outside of their property, and like over a period of 10 to 20 years, versus the city borrowing the money for a term of, say, 30 years, costing us a lot more money. Let's see here. Okay, and there was 3 borrows, payments of $1,200 for government bonds recently, in the that was paid for old bonds. And I'm curious, is this an annual thing, or was this money borrowed, or is this is this an annual cost to us, or is it a one-time item? Thank you.
Thanks.
Diana Zelinsky, 4572 South Packard Avenue. Mr. Mayor, Mr. Larson, Cudahy Aldermanic representatives, I'm addressing the CIP proposal that's been developed without any public input and that you're presenting tonight. When there was funding available, this administration, along with the CDA, gave out grants to parties that seemed frivolous and personal to Cudahy residents, but retaliation was feared if anyone complained. ARPA funds were not meant for roads and structure repairs, infrastructure repairs, city equipment expenses, not roofs or tavern siding or personal funding projects. They should have been spent on revitalizing our city. We also do not need surveys, polls, or studies again to tell you what our residents need or want. Cudahy has paid hundreds of thousands of dollars over the last 40 years to have several of such studies done, and they always say the same thing. Mr. Larson, Mayor Jankowski, as you described in your procedures to formulate the CIP, you forgot one major item: the will of the people you were hired and elected to serve. In going behind the backs of the residents by having individual meetings with each of the representatives of your leadership staff and the department heads, you attempted to circumvent state law, the Open Meetings Act. You stated that you met with department heads and leadership staff individually, violating state statute section 19.83. You met with those individuals without proper notification to the public and did not hold these meetings in open session, which is also a violation of state statute 19.84, sections 1 and 2, and sections 2 through 6. That being the case, since you violated several state statutes, I propose that the CIP financing plan be tabled and set aside until the following items can be done. 1, proper notification to residents of a town hall meeting to discuss the proposal, and that those officials attending put down their phones and actually listen to the residents and respond to their questions. 2, the citizens of Cudahy have the opportunity to vote on this proposal via a referendum that would be placed on the November ballot. We have too long had our voices silenced by the non-responsive behavior on the part of our elected officials, and should be given a chance to have our voices heard regarding any major spending done in the city in the future. $18,660,000 is not pocket change. That's the total indicated in our city's budget, the city's check register for February in a packet of 111 pages. That since you violated the public trust now and in the past, I hereby request, no, I demand, that you step down as city administrator and as the mayor of the city of Cudahy. Thank you.
All personal will not be allowed, as was read under the public comment.
Karen Milkey, 5804 South Delaware Avenue. I was looking at what was presented in your packets, and I noticed that we're paying $365 a month for a weather forecast. I guess I'm just kind of confused. I thought we went line by line through the budget and decided what we could get rid of.
I don't think that's in the CIP. Sorry.
Well, it's all part of the budget that you want to approve, correct?
No,
No?
It was in the
it's
minutes.
not in this presentation.
Okay.
I think that's in the common council one.
Okay.
Sorry.
My concern is that some of this that the alderman got on Friday, and you want them to vote on some of this tonight, I'm sorry, but that's not enough time. And you're asking the aldermen to put their necks on the line. You're voting for things. And if you don't have the time to look at it and decide whether or not it's something you feel is legitimate for the city, that's not fair to the alder people for you to do that to them. I think that's wrong. Look at my other question. I'll wait till later. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're getting older.
I'm not getting younger.
Hold on a second, okay?
Sure.
There you go, go ahead.
Okay. Bruce Shupnick, 3343 East Van Norman Avenue. I'll make this real short. South Milwaukee, Glendale / River Hills, and Whitefish Bay, what do they have all in common? They had referendums on the ballot on April 7th. Letting their citizenry vote what they want to spend, what expenses they need, what they want to basically have in regards to capital improvements. That's all I have to say. I believe it should go on the referendum, either in August or November. Thank you.
Thank you.
You say the same thing you do.
Yeah, I agree with
couple of people here, Tom Schmidt, 3954 East Birchwood. You should go on a referendum. You had South Milwaukee last week, $425,000. They put it on a referendum. We got 3 times more than that, 4 times more than that. You'd be a fool to vote for this. And the little thing that I did looking at this, I don't want, you know, if it's good, bad, or ugly, we had a F-750 plow dump truck. How did this thing even pan out? That we're gonna order one for the next 5 years. Each year you wanna buy another one. If we do get wet, heavy, ugly snow, how do you put a wing on that thing? Just a thought. I mean, there's gotta be more thinking involved in a lot of this stuff. This is not right. You guys are nominated and elected, I get that. Well, and I'm not trying to poo-poo anything out or anybody, their education. But you get something on a Thursday, and you're gonna vote on it on a Monday, man, you guys are good. You guys, I don't know what school you went to, but I'll tell you what, you guys are good. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comment on the capital improvement plan or the meeting minutes?
Skip J.G.'s 2636 East Eaton Lane. I stand here as a deeply concerned resident of Cudahy. We are being suffocated by constant tax hikes. Just after a school increase, a wheel tax, a forestry tax. As an example, my bi-monthly water bill this past time, a year ago, was $84. This past month, it was $135. That is a 57% year-over-year increase. And now, in a separate ban shell proposal by the mayor, while the mayor suggests upfront private funding, all future maintenance falls on us, the city of Cudahy residents. We have a hard time maintaining what we have now, and you're proposing more. When does the belt tightening start at City Hall? A lot of cities are remodeling their historical buildings. You want to tear down and build new structures. What about the city's motto, Generations of Pride? With your concept, there won't be any past generational buildings to be proud of. A typical small city's average CIP is between 2 and 10 million. Mid-sized cities are between 15 and 40 million. So not to overburden city taxpayers. A CIP should have been presented long before today so that it could be explained, debated in public, and voted on by the residents of Cudahy. The residents of Cudahy should have a referendum to decide if they truly want to spend $125 million on these projects. This proposal should be turned down tonight, and it should be on the ballot in November. We need a balanced budget. What we need in this city is an austerity program, one that doesn't bankrupt us or exploit older residents. This so-called special meeting tied to the CIP must be transparent. I believe all department heads need to be at the meeting to explain what they want and why they want it and give us full detail. In my opinion, your administration is lacking in honesty, transparency, and forthright speech. The appearance is evasive, devious, and uncandid behavior. It is a sad state of affairs for the residents at this meeting tonight and all the people who voted for you. An example of the lack of transparency, there are no minutes or agenda for the public here to read. We can't see that.
Thank you.
It is our right to
Thank
have
you, sir.
the pertinent information, to be well-informed
Time is up, sir.
citizenry.
Thank you.
Anyone else like to speak?
Okay. Thomas Barn, 3735 Pulaski. If you take my property tax history from 30 years ago, 20 years ago, and 10 years ago, inflation adjusted to today's dollars, I'm paying 9% less, 9 to 6% less than inflation adjusted from those dates. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else like to speak? Seeing none, we will move on. Old business, we have none. New business, item 1, discussion and necessary action regarding the minutes of the Finance Committee held October 21st, 2025. Just looking for approval, or if any changes are needed.
I'll move to approve.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Motion was made by Alderperson LaFerski, seconded by Alderperson Levy, to approve the minutes of the Finance Committee held October 21st, 2025. On a roll call, Alderperson Levy,
Yes.
Alderperson Haynes,
Yes.
Alderperson LaFerski,
Yes.
Alderperson St. Belko,
Yes.
Citizen Member Campbell,
Yes.
Citizen Member Papala,
Yes.
and the chair also votes yes. New business item 2, the presentation of the capital improvement plan that was presented in our packet. And just to say, I didn't have any special meetings over this capital improvement plan. I'll turn it over to the city administrator.
Brief memo in your packet outlining how we came to this plan, and we met with each department that's got appropriate projects and or equipment replacements in the proposed plan. Once we compiled all that information with our staff, this was forwarded to Greg Johnson's team at Ellers to throw into the financing plan you see before you, and that draft is here for your consideration and discussion tonight.
Greg with Ellers wants to make the presentation.
Good evening. I'll go through the presentation that was included in your packet. There's a summary page on page 2 that kind of provides an overview of the financing plan. As was mentioned, this is a multi-year capital improvement plan that identifies capital projects that were funded starting last fiscal year in 2025 and show proposed capital improvement projects out through 2035. Within the plan over that 10-year period, there's about $18.7 million for equipment, $66.8 million for infrastructure, and $39.9 million for facilities. I want to emphasize this is a planning model for informational purposes only. You are not taking any action this evening to authorize borrowing for any projects. That would require future action by the Common Council, so this is really an informational presentation only, just for your consideration to understand the financial impacts before any action would be taken to finance any of the projects included within the plan. In terms of how we've modeled the debt service and the debt structure over the 10-year planning horizon of this CIP, we look at a variety of factors. We look at the revenue source that's going to be pledged to repay the debt service, whether that be revenue from the property tax levy or revenue from each of the respective utilities. And then we also take into account the useful life of the assets being financed. So both of those factors, as well as others, are what are taken into in terms of how the financing plan is put together. What we put together for you today is really kind of an option for initial consideration. We can look at other different debt structures based on your feedback and input. But in terms of how the debt was structured over the next 10 years for planning purposes, was to really achieve a consistent levy increase year over year for these capital projects. Avoiding a larger spike the year following debt issuance, but kind of leveling that out over the planning period. So for budgetary purposes, if everything was funded in this illustrative model, you'd have a consistent levy target that you could factor into your budget year over year. In this version of the capital improvement plan, all of the projects are financed with general obligation debt. There are two general types of debt that can be issued by municipalities. The first is the most common, which is general obligation debt, which legally pledges an irrepealable tax levy to repay the debt service. Any debt service levied for general obligation debt is exempt from levy limits under state law. The other form of debt is called revenue debt, where you're legally pledging a revenue source other than property tax levy to repay the debt. Common examples of that the city has used when appropriate in the past are water and sewer revenue bonds, where you are pledging water and sewer revenues legally to repay the debt. There is no statutory limit on the amount of revenue debt that you can issue. The amount of general obligation principal that you can have outstanding can exceed 5% of the city's total equalized value. While all projects in this plan are financed with general obligation debt, it is still the expectation that any projects financed by the utilities, that debt service would be repaid by revenues of those utilities. So even though legally GO debt is not backed by revenues of water and sewer utilities, for example, you can still pledge and budget that revenue to repay the debt. The city has a long-standing practice of doing just that. So before we look at the impact of the proposed capital improvement plan, let's kind of start with where you stand presently with your existing general obligation debt outstanding. So in the far left-hand column of this chart is the gross annual principal and interest payments that the city has outstanding presently for existing debt that's already in place. The city budgets several non-levy revenue sources to repay that debt service. Revenue from TIF districts, the sewer utility, water utility, and the stormwater utility are the most common forms of revenue that the city budgets to cover each of those TIF districts or utilities' proportionate share of the debt. So in the 2025 budget, your levy for debt service was about $2,070,000. In the 2026 budget, your levy was largely unchanged. It was $2,066,000. So in the third column for the right, it shows what your equalized tax rate per thousand of value is just for debt service. For the 2025 budget, it was $1.19 per thousand of equalized value. That was the tax rate just for the city's debt service. So in the 2025 budget, for every $100,000 of value, that was about $116 a year for debt. In the 2026 budget, the levy for debt service was $1.11 per thousand. For every $100,000 of value, that was about $111 per year for debt service. And so this chart just looks at where we stand presently before we look at the impact of any proposed debt for any capital project going forward. So seeing that net tax levy column, the city's debt service levy really remains stable if no other debt was issued, out through 2028, and then it starts to decline going forward. The next several pages is a detailed listing of the capital projects that was mentioned by staff, that was provided by us to us at Ellers to kind of model within this plan. So the chart is kind of broken down by equipment, by capital type. So there's a detailed listing of equipment, what department the equipment is applicable to, and then the anticipated repayment source, whether that be the levy. Some of these items are funded through the Capital Projects Fund. Majority of them are shown as financed with debt. It shows the repayment source of that debt and the amortization term for each project. So I'm not going to go through the list of all of these particular projects. They're been in your CIP. They're just there for reference. Again, our role at Ellers is to provide you with information in terms of the fiscal impact of financing capital projects. It's not our role to tell you what capital projects you should undertake. I'm not going to tell you what street to repave or street to reconstruct. That's really all of you are better equipped to do that. We're just taking the information, providing you with information to base those decisions upon. So the remainder of the capital project list are broken down by infrastructure projects, which is largely street, water, and sewer projects. And then there's a separate page that listed proposed facility projects out for the next several years. So in the chart, and we kind of blow this up in a moment, but on page 8, it just kind of shows the detail between all of the debt issues that are funded. So again, this model is for illustration purposes only, shows if everything was financed in the CIP as presented, which understand you go through regular reviews of your CIP, so understand changes would likely be forthcoming, but it's good to have a multi-year capital plan to kind of base these long-term financial models on. You'll see that there's proposed debt issuance, annually from 2026 to 2035 to fund the projects that were listed in all the detailed spreadsheets. We kind of show interest rates of about 4.25% in 2026, 4.5% in 2027, and then just use a flat 5% for the remaining of the planning period. So the tax levy impact is summarized on the next page, on page 9, in terms of how that would change the city's levy for debt service. So on the far left-hand side of this chart, that's the existing levy for debt service that was brought forth from the previous slide. That's what the city is going to levy for debt service based on existing debt that is outstanding. Then we have the projected valuation within the city, which is really based off of your 5 years average growth discounted by 50%. So it's a conservative look at your valuation growth. And then we have the total net debt service levy. That takes into account your existing debt that needs to be repaid and all the capital borrowings that are included in this model for projects from 2026 through 2035. So again, this is kind of that all-in analysis that says if literally everything, all those capital projects for equipment, infrastructure, and facilities were all financed, this is an estimation of where the property tax levy, how that would change going forward. So the answer to that question is if everything was funded, the property tax levy would increase on average about $415,000 per year annually from 2027 through 2036. That really covers the 10-year planning horizon that we have in this particular model. So as I mentioned in my opening comments, the debt was structured to achieve that consistent amount year over year. So it's again, some years you're borrowing more, some years you're borrowing less, but we're trying to structure the debt service payment so that levy increase year over year is fairly consistent. So if we look at the difference from 2026 to 2027, for example, the tax rate for debt service in the city's budget in 2026 was $1.05 per thousand. So for every $100,000 of value, that was about $105 per year just for debt service. In 2027, if that levy were to increase about $419,000, that tax rate would go from $1.05 per thousand to a projected $1.23 per thousand. So for that $100,000 of value, the total property tax bill would be about $123 annually for debt service. That is a $21 per year increase just for the portion of the city tax bill related to debt service. And then you'll see going forward, again, kind of that annual levy increase that averages out to about $415,000 per year. And the taxes for $100,000 of value, that shows how much you're paying annually for all debt service, both existing and the proposed debt in this model. And then the annual taxes in the column to the far right, that just kind of shows as the model goes on, how much of that total taxes of $100,000 is attributable to debt issued from 2026 through 2035. As was mentioned, in terms of the general obligation debt limit, that's statutory. So the amount of general obligation principal that the city has outstanding cannot exceed 5% of the city's total equalized value. So in this chart, if you look at the year ending 2025, the beginning of this fiscal year, the city's debt outstanding at the beginning of the year was approximately $21,407,000. Again, that's GO debt only because that's the only debt that's subject to this statutory limit. The city's GO debt limit was a little over $100 million, so you had utilized about 21.27% of your total debt limit. So the chart then on the right-hand side, in terms of kind of the columns that are highlighted in orange, that shows where that GO debt capacity utilization percentage, what that would reach if everything in this plan was fully funded with general obligation debt. So the general obligation debt limit would peak at about 61% of utilization in 2033. which would still leave you a projected roughly $49 million of remaining borrowing capacity. So as I mentioned, general obligation debt is the most common form of debt that communities issue. It's typically the lowest cost of financing available to a community. Absent general obligation debt limit, if that didn't exist, you would finance all projects with general obligation debt because that's the lowest cost of financing. Generally, the reason communities consider issuing revenue debt is because it doesn't count towards that statutory limit. So with this plan, which includes funding of utilities' respective share of several of the capital projects or projects that are solely attributable to the utility, that's included in this calculation. So you reach about 61% of your debt limit, even including the utility projects. So we still think that's a comfortable range in terms of the debt utilization. Again, let's make distinctions here. We're not talking about affordability with this chart. We're talking about how much debt you can legally issue. Affordability is a separate question. That was the roughly $415,000 per year increase to the levy. So to summarize the long-range model that's on the next chart, as I said, the debt service levy was structured to increase about $415,000 per year from 2027 through 2036. That's if everything in this model was funded. So it's kind of taking the full CIP and just showing what that impact would be. As I mentioned, the GO debt capacity utilization, it's about 61% in 2033. You could finance water and sewer projects with revenue debt. It wouldn't count towards your GO debt limit, but revenue debt generally comes at a higher interest rate. So there's a little more cost to that form of financing. So as I mentioned in my opening comments, this is really informational for presentation purposes. There's nothing on your agenda that authorizes you to issue any debt at this particular meeting. That typically comes at a later point. Anytime a community borrows money, the first step is a resolution that has to be adopted by the city council identifying the amount that you're borrowing. We put this initial plan together for kind of discussion and feedback this evening. We can certainly look at different debt structures if there are changes to the financing plan. We can model those as appropriate. Can take more look at utilities going forward as well. But typically this is kind of an iterative process. Need a starting point to kind of evaluate a CIP. That's really what we're intended to present here tonight. Just kind of that initial starting point to give you a sense of where this starts, and we can certainly make adjustments going forward. So that's the overview of the CIP. I'll pause here, see if there's questions or if staff has anything further they want to interject. Certainly want to give them an opportunity as well.
Anyone have any questions about the presentation or for it? How it was presented?
Are the tax levies adjusted for inflation? You estimate it as you push them out?
Can you speak in the microphone?
Thank you. I was just curious, as you project out and the tax levy calculations out into the future, are those adjusted for inflation?
Yeah, so the tax levy just is, again, the dollar amount that you need to collect for debt service. So that number, while it's fixed in the analysis, we're taking into account future adjustments in interest rates in terms of what that debt service is going to be. But then in terms of the tax rate per thousand, we're projecting some growth in the overall value of the city, but that growth projection is intended to be conservative. We're looking at the 5-year history of the city's average increase in annual tax rate base growth year over year, and we're reducing that by 50%. So we're factoring in some growth in the tax base, some increase in interest rates going forward, and then I know staff has factored in inflation in terms of the actual project costs that are being financed. So all those variables are built into the model. It's an assumption, but we try to account for all those factors.
So just following up with that, with the equalized values, you had said that you were being conservative in estimating the amount of increase. Could you share like what kind of an interest assumption you did, growth of equalized value, is it 3%, 4%?
2.56% annually.
And that's what's in the model?
Correct.
Okay, that seems conservative.
It's
Okay.
intended to be.
Thank you.
Anyone else have any questions? This is something that the city does every year or every other year, correct?
Historically, yeah, we're a little bit delayed now, and it'd be my intention to bring it back at least annually, if not even more often, if we find projects, improved plans change or something significant changes, but at least annually.
How does when a TIF closes, how does that affect this? Is that calculated in this, or is that a separate calculation outside of this?
Well, I'll let Greg speak to, it'd be, I think, high level would be incorporated more into our overall, financial management plan, more than others has historically done for us too.
So when a TID district closes, it really impacts the valuation that's used in this analysis, because when a TID closes, all the incremental value that's been generated returns to the tax roll, the year after closure. The two city TIF districts that are, close to closure here within the next couple of years are both your environmental TID districts, ETID 1 and ETID 2. There is incremental value in ETID 1. It's not a significant amount that you're going to see, a significant impact on the financial model. Comparatively, when the city closed its last tax incremental finance district several years ago, that district upon closure, don't quote me on the number, but was over 200 million of value at the time of closure. That was a lot of tax value that returned to the tax rolls at once. The city had planned several years in advance for that TID closure, knowing that that was going to have a significant impact on the property tax rate. So that year after closure, there was a notable decline in the tax rate for all taxing jurisdictions as a result of the significant value coming back online to the tax roll. The other active TID districts, TID 5 and TID 6, are still relatively new in terms of their maximum life, so the closure of those isn't factored into this analysis because it's likely extends beyond the planning period.
Thank you. I just had one question because I know that as we were going through, and Ellers didn't really talk about the lists of the equipment and the facilities and that, and it was used more so for illustration purposes, but it was garnered from the department heads. And so I guess my question is there an existing inventory of assets, equipment, facilities that would show the descriptions of what we have, the original cost, useful life, the value, and are some of these pieces of equipment at nearing the end of their useful lives, and are these things that are in here replacements that are planned out there, or are they new? I can't really tell from some of this, and I know that would be information I think that would be important for me and maybe the rest of the council as well to have, to help and determine what pieces of this might get brought forward to the council.
Yeah, at a high level, we don't have the useful life or the original data purchase in the presentation. It just makes them bigger. Broadly speaking, equipment-wise, there's nothing necessarily new in here. These are all planned replacements. And I'd let department heads speak to any specific questions, but I believe all of them are, if not they're stretched beyond what's best practice recommended useful life for the pieces of equipment. The project list, the streets and utility projects listed, were originally developed by an engineering consultant and then vetted by our staff, and as Greg referenced, we had project escalators on those before we send it to others. And then the facilities work is relatively rough at this point. There was previous information from nearly a decade ago on the Public Works facility. The overall cost there at this point is just my consultation with an architect after a different meeting, asking about a per square foot estimate, and then using that whole information to put a number in here for planning purposes at this point. And City Hall is pretty similar right now because we have a consultant that will be wrapping up their study of this very soon. So that slide is at this point. Kind of best guesses for these planning and discussion purposes right now.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, just one last follow-up, and I promise I'll, so the staging of some of these assets that would be funded with some of the GeoDep,